what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to Astoria, the major west coast city that never was. I saw this pop up when the video was first released, and I didn't really think much of it. I mean, I don't know this place, never heard anything to do with this thing, so I just thought, yeah, I probably won't react to that. And then I saw it's got a lot of views in like 3 days time, so it's obviously something that a lot of people know about, are interested by. And I'm always into these niche stories, or I say niche, it's got loads of views, so maybe not so niche, but just these, yeah, like these places that, I don't know what actually went on here, but it's obviously in history. There was a point in time where I guess it was going to be the biggest city in this region, and then something happened, I don't know, maybe there was like a fire or something, like the Great Fire of London, but no, we're going to see what this place is about and learn about the stories here or whatever. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Let's jump into this reaction. Also, this is my first video since the new year, so hopefully you had a great new year and all that stuff, and they all recovered. Yeah, I'm just gonna go into this reaction and see what this video is about.
Seattle, Washington, and Portland, Oregon make up the two major US cities in the Pacific Northwest. But what if I told you that neither was ever intended to become major cities? In fact, the Pacific Northwest equivalent of New York City was supposed to be located at the mouth of the Columbia River, but that city never materialized. Here's why.
Wait, so it was never actually there?
In the Pacific Northwest, there exists a region that appears to be similar to the San Francisco Bay Area on paper. It has a large body of water that allows for ships to travel in and out of and escape the rough ocean waves. It has plenty of peninsulas with relatively flat terrain allowing for settlements and towns. And of course, there are plenty of forests and timber nearby to harvest for all of those buildings. It also happens to be where the United States first envisioned the major city for the Pacific Northwest. But despite all of these similarities...
Oh, so when, I guess they had first got to this land, or this people first started moving, I guess that's what he's saying. That was the plan, to make this the major city. And I assume, based on what I just saw, they actually did begin that, because there is a few homes or like a bit of like remnants of a city or a town there.
These existing on paper, the reality is they're very different. When it was first discovered, the area where the Columbia River meets the Pacific Ocean appeared promising for settlement. Despite harsh rainy weather, for which the coastal areas of Oregon and Washington are infamous for, it would appear to have all of the necessary geographic ingredients for a major settlement to thrive, just like San Francisco does. But this is where we get our first major difference. Unlike the Columbia River Bar, the Golden Gate provides a relatively straightforward passage from the Pacific Ocean to the San Francisco Bay. This opening is framed by rugged cliffs and tidal currents, but the waters are generally calmer compared to the Columbia's entrance. And thus, the San Francisco Bay Area was able to accommodate a large port in ways the Columbia River Bar never could. So let's dive into the Columbia for a bit. The Columbia River is the prime artery of one of North America's longest river systems. From the Canadian Rockies through the arid plateaus of the Pacific Northwest and to the Pacific Ocean, it drains a vast watershed and carries an enormous volume of water. Every single second, about 100 swimming pools worth of water are dumped into the Pacific Ocean. But with all this water, it also brings a vast amount of sediment, which creates a constantly shifting sandbar at its mouth. This interplay of river currents, ocean swells, and tidal forces creates an environment of turbulent waters and large, unpredictable waves. Mix that with a sandbar that is constantly shifting under the water, and you've got a recipe for disaster.
Not what you want.
This disaster has struck time and time again, with nearly 2,000 ships meeting their fate in this region.
What? Is this in recent history, or is this just in recorded history? I guess 2,000 ships is the entirety of what they've recorded of shipwrecks here
alone. Hence the nickname it has since acquired, the Graveyard of the Pacific.
I've definitely heard of the Graveyard of the Pacific, but there you go. That's probably the main reason, if we're honest.
But that doesn't mean the United States didn't try. In fact, they tried before San Francisco was ever even considered to be a major city for the country. Today, the Pacific Northwest is one of the country's most important economic centers. But this wasn't always the case. In fact, the story behind how the Pacific Northwest evolved into the region it is today begins with two significant outposts. Astoria, Oregon, founded by American entrepreneur John Jacob Astor's Pacific Fur Company in 1811, and Fort Vancouver, established by the British Hudson's Bay Company in 1825. Astoria's origins are deeply rooted in the fur trade, which drove much of the early exploration in the Pacific Northwest. John Jacob Astor envisioned creating a trading empire that would dominate the North American fur trade, linking the Pacific Northwest with markets in China and the eastern United States. The location of Astoria, at the mouth of the Columbia River, was carefully chosen for its access to the interior fur trapping regions, and its strategic position for maritime trade and the Columbia River served as a natural highway into the heart of the region, allowing traders and trappers to transport goods and furs efficiently. Astor's plans for Astoria were ambitious, to say the very least. He aimed to establish a permanent American presence in the region, creating a foothold that could solidify U.S. claims to the Pacific Northwest under the doctrine of manifest destiny. To accomplish this, Astor sent two expeditions to establish the settlement, one by sea aboard the ship Tonquin, and another overland, retracing the path of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Despite hardships and challenges, including difficult negotiations with local indigenous peoples and a challenging voyage around the southern tip of South America, Astoria was established as the first American-owned settlement in the West Coast, beating out Seattle.
Wait, it was the first?
Portland, San Francisco.
That is mad. Okay, so they really did plan for this to be, I mean, obviously based on the title and what he said, that makes sense, but the fact that it was the first place where people settled is pretty mad. Unless I've heard that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what he's just said. I've got a habit of not fully listening, you know, so got to make sure.
American-owned settlement in the West Coast, beating
owned
America.
settlement.
Astoria was established as the first American-owned settlement in the West Coast, beating out Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and Los Angeles.
Bloody
But
hell.
Astor wasn't alone in his desire to claim the Pacific Northwest. The British were also very interested in it. The British had long viewed the Pacific Northwest as a critical region for their own fur trading enterprises. The Hudson's Bay Company, a powerful and well-established organization, had already built an extensive network of trading posts across Canada and sought to expand its influence into the Columbia River Basin. Fort Vancouver, located on the north bank of the Columbia River near present-day Portland, Oregon, became the centerpiece of British operations in the region. The motivations behind the establishment of Fort Vancouver were not solely economic. The British sought to solidify their own claims to the region, countering American expansionist ambitions. In fact, the fort's location was chosen in order to dominate the Columbia River, which was seen as the key to controlling the Pacific Northwest. By maintaining a strong presence in the area, the British hoped to leverage their position in any future territorial negotiations with the United States, which sought to build inland from the coast. The early years of these settlements were marked by tension and competition. Astoria's position as an American outpost was short-lived. During the War of 1812, the British took control of the settlement, renaming.
Wait, so are we going to say it's the British? It's the fault of the British? I've heard that saying before, but is that actually is that realistically a reason for stunting the growth?
Fort George. Although the Treaty of Ghent returned Astoria to American hands, the Hudson's Bay Company's dominance in the region overshadowed American efforts for decades. Fort Vancouver became the de facto center of trade and governance in the Pacific Northwest, with John McLaughlin playing a key role in managing relations with indigenous peoples, American settlers, and Russian traders. With Astoria effectively abandoned and Fort Vancouver taking prominence in the Pacific
Oh, this is Fort Vancouver.
Northwest, the likelihood of a major city at the mouth of the Columbia River would have appeared to be gone for good. But Astoria would, in fact, rise again, and it could have still regained its crown had a few important decisions been made instead.
The rise of Portland and Seattle.
Astoria, Oregon once seemed destined to be the Pacific Northwest's main city, thanks to its prime spot at the Columbia River's mouth. But despite its historic importance, it never became a major urban center. Instead, cities like Portland and Seattle rose to regional prominence. and it's because of a combination of geographic, economic, and infrastructural decisions that shaped this outcome. At the heart of it, Astoria's location has always been more of a limitation than an advantage. While its position at the Columbia River's mouth offered unparalleled access to the Pacific Ocean, the region's rugged terrain and narrow coastal strip left little room for expansion. More critically, the Columbia River Bar posed a significant challenge for maritime trade. At this point in time, Astoria would have been competing with San Francisco as the major port on the West Coast. But these natural obstacles made it difficult to establish a reliable and safe shipping hub, something San Francisco could provide. But this wasn't necessarily the only reason why Astoria didn't succeed. After all, Seattle did succeed. Instead, it would be the arrival of railroads in the 1800s to the region that would ultimately crater Astoria's chances at becoming a major city. You see, railroad companies at the time were desperate to connect major settlements in the West with the eastern United States, mostly because while the West was growing, the economic center of the country still sat in New York City and, to a lesser degree, Chicago. As such, by the late 1800s, railroads had connected Seattle, Tacoma, and Portland with Chicago and the rest of the country, and it was expected to terminate in Astoria. Unfortunately for Astoria and its residents who banked on a rail connection, the train never arrived.
No way.
Faced with the high cost of constructing a line through the rugged coastal mountain range, the Northern Pacific Railway instead stopped at Gobel, Oregon, about 50 miles east of Astoria.
Damn.
This effectively made Portland the last stop of the line. This decision left Astoria cut off from the key transportation technology that was shaping cities across the country. Instead, the burgeoning rail network propelled Portland and Seattle into vital trade and transportation hubs. And without direct...
The thing is, at this time, all these US cities on the West Coast, they weren't massive at this point. They were probably still very small, if anything. So that could have genuinely changed history. I mean, it's a bit extreme, but maybe if that region got a rail connection, it probably would have became another major city, or at least a lot bigger. I don't know why I say changed history. Changed history for that town, Astoria. That's more what I'm trying to say.
Rail access, Astoria struggled to attract the same level of investment and economic activity, remaining reliant on river and ocean transport, which was inherently more limited. In contrast, Portland's inland location, about 100 miles upriver, provided a more favorable setting for connecting river traffic with railroads, cementing its role as the region's central hub. But railroads weren't the only advantage Portland and Seattle had. More than anything else, Portland's growth was fueled by its proximity to the fertile lands of the Willamette Valley, one of the most agriculturally productive regions in the United States. The valley's rich volcanic soil.
God, imagine having a farm like this in front of this mountain. That is one of the coolest. That's got to be one of the coolest backdrops you can have. That is unreal.
And moderate climate made it ideal for farming, drawing settlers during the mid-1800s via the famous Oregon Trail. And with its position at the confluence of the Columbia and Willamette rivers, this enabled the city to become the primary gateway for exporting the valley's agricultural bounty, including wheat, fruits, and other crops. This agricultural wealth attracted businesses, workers, and infrastructure development, further entrenching Portland's dominance. Astoria, lacking access to this fertile hinterland and the transportation infrastructure to link to larger markets, couldn't compete. Meanwhile, Seattle's rise in the late 1800s was driven by factors distinct from those shaping Astoria and Portland. Seattle's location on the Puget Sound provided a sheltered, deep-water harbor ideal for large-scale maritime trade that was also safe to traverse. While Astoria struggled with the hazardous Columbia River Bar, Seattle's port became a reliable hub for shipping timber, coal, and other resources to domestic and international markets. The Klondike Gold Rush of the late 1890s further spurred Seattle's growth, as it became a staging ground for prospectors heading to Alaska, injecting wealth and population into the city. The 1900s would see Seattle capitalize on its previous industrial growth in ways that Astoria simply couldn't. The development of shipbuilding during World War I and World War II established Seattle as a center for maritime industries, which would eventually lead to the rise of aerospace manufacturing, led by Boeing. These industries transformed Seattle into a metropolitan powerhouse, attracting skilled labor and creating a diversified economy. The city's proximity to natural resources, such as timber, and its ability to adapt to emerging industries set it apart from smaller, resource-dependent towns like Astoria. While Astoria remained
Sad
focused
face.
on fishing, canning, and logging, industries that faced decline due to
Left behind.
overfishing, environmental regulations, and automation, Seattle thrived by diversing into technology and global trade. And finally, when Astoria had already lost so much of its momentum, it faced one more fatal blow: the Great Astoria Fire of 1922.
I mean, I sort of predicted that. I did say the Great Fire of London. I mean, it was probably already far gone by this point, but I'm taking that.
This fire devastated much of the city's downtown and further hindered its ability to recover
Oh, bro, that was a massive fire. Flipping hell. How do you even recover from this?
and grow.
Especially in in this day and age, like, it's not like a major city. So, like, how are you building back from this?
Even as tourism and cultural heritage efforts revived Astoria's local economy in later decades, it simply couldn't compete with the economic power that Portland or Seattle had solidified in the Pacific Northwest. Today, Seattle and Portland lead the Pacific Northwest with populations of 4 million and 2.5 million, while Astoria has just 10,000 people. It's hard to imagine now, but with a few twists in history, Astoria could have been a major city in the region. This was a really fun dive into the
That
Pacific.
is pretty mad. Like, the city that never became, you know, that sort of stuff. I do like these sorts of stories where you just find out these wild ass cases, just cities not becoming like big, or just random stories like this, to be fair. As a resident of Portland, I always was curious why Portland developed as a major city, not Astoria. Great video as usual. I think it's funny that you made a comparison between San Francisco and Astoria, because I've always thought when I visited Astoria that it reminded me of San Francisco. That if San Francisco was a small town. Yeah, there we go. This little place called Astoria could have been a capital city. Probably not. But no, it could have been a major city and ended up just being a tiny little town. But yeah, this was a pretty interesting video. Hopefully you enjoyed, and until next time, like, subscribe. Peace.